Welcome to another episode of Respections. I'm your host, Patrick Tomlinson, and we have been fortunate to be here for part 2 at the Lewis Latimer House Museum in Flushing, Queens. So we have another exciting episode. We'll treat you to a number of historical artifacts and stories, and we hope that you'll make the effort to come personally to the Lewis Latimer houses here in Flushing, Queens. Take your family, your friends, your school groups, your educational groups, your religious groups to the Lewis Latimer House. It's a fascinating presentation. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Lewis Latimer House Museum. Again, you're located here in Flushing, Queens. We are focusing a little bit more on the ways in which community was a massive part of the Latimer family, but also helping to share Latimer's story himself. So this is our gallery, Community at the Center, and it talks about how Lewis carries on this activist interest, this perseverance, this awareness that really helped to save his parents. So George and Rebecca, again, George was arrested, recognized when they escaped to Boston, but they were really saved by the local community, the anti-slavery community in Boston at the time. So again, that just kind of continues throughout his life. So I'm sitting in front of one of our new interactives, where another wheel, you can scroll through to learn more about different community members who, again, have been a part of sharing his story. In the previous segment, we mentioned Dr. Winifred Latimer Norman, again, Latimer's granddaughter. She was, again, a social worker. She was a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority in Manhattan. She co-chaired the committee to save the Lewis Latimer House, and it is thanks to her and the efforts of her brother, Gerald Norman, the borough president at the time, to ensure that not only was Latimer's story being remembered and saved, but that the house itself would be saved, which in itself is an incredible story. There are images right here of, again, the house actually being moved. So Lewis and his wife Mary lived in this house. Both of their mothers also lived in this house. The two daughters, Emma Jeanette and Lucia Rebecca, lived in the house as well. When Lewis and Renee pass away, it transfers to his daughter Louise, and she opened up the house to students and artists in the area to help them find housing. And when she passes, it passes on to different community members who were in their neighborhood. The house was sold to developers and was going to be torn down to make space for more housing. So again, that sparks these massive efforts by Dr. Norman down here. Also, and the family portrait behind you as well. It sparks this effort to make sure that the house is being saved, remembered, picked up from its original foundations, carried and traveled throughout the street, and then placed on this plot of land right here, which is part of Park's land. There's also a map in the corner where you can see the original street, Holly Street, where the Latimers lived. You can also see Juniper Street, where Imogen and her husband, Gerald F. Norman, lived. And then you can see where we currently sit. More community members who are very active within the story of the museum. We are still in contact with members of the Delta Sigma Theta sororities, primarily our Queens chapter. Some of these amazing women are part of our board. So Ms. Keisha Clayton is a Brooklyn educator. Hugh Price is Latimer's great-grandnephew. He was former CEO of the National Urban League, and he is now our board chair and is a frequent member and a really big supporter of Latimer's story. Although he'll tell you, or he might tell you the story of how when he was younger and he was a teen, he would come to visit the house. he had places to go, and he wasn't as engaged in the story. And as he became older, he really then wanted to kind of carry on the legacy of his great-granduncle. And so you see the house, again, being picked up and carried throughout the street. We worked with Deb Allen, she's a contractor, to move the house. Parts of the house had to be removed and then attached back onto the house as it was being carried throughout the street. It was an incredible story. There's a video, we can also see this happening. This image includes, it's a Pratt class photo. Louise is right there, so we get to see her as a Pratt student, one of the only Black students at the time in 1911. So the exhibition is primarily on the first floor here. The second floor are our offices. The third floor, the attic space, houses the objects and our archive that we have right now. The Queens Public Library holds the rest of the Latimer family collection. We are really excited though for the next few years within this just new chapter of the museum. We received an IMLS grant to support the digitization of our collection. So that means that we can really share and showcase all of Lewis Latimer's drawings, all of his work, the work of his daughters, the work of other people that he was in connection with, things that the family kept. We can make those available digitally for anyone to research. So whether it's a student, a teacher, those things will be able to be accessed online. This timeline here talks a little bit about the construction of the house. So it was finished in 1889. The owners were the Sexton family. The husband was a painter. Lewis Latimer buys the house. They settle in 1903. But kind of right when they buy the house, Latimer makes additions and changes to the house. So we'll see our classroom space in a little bit that actually Latimer uses as his own study. He adds that addition onto the house. He's done the drawings for that house, the designs. Community members have helped him to actually build that part of the house. So again, Lewis Latimer dies in 1928. Mary dies a few years before him. And so Louise again lives here until her passing in 1963. So again, we see Dr. Winifred Norman and her brother Gerald Norman receiving the designation for the Latimer House, being named a New York City landmark. A beautiful picture of our house. Again, a campaign to formalize it into a museum, bring it back to kind of what it looked like originally. Louise had made a few additions. Community members, once they also had control of the house, they also made a few additions to the house, but it was renovated to what it originally looked like. And then again, we reopened this past June. This is Al Rankin. He was our original board president. He is a former educator. He was also president of the chapter of the NAACP chapter in Flushing at one point as well. Okay, so this is one of my other favorite parts of the museum. I think it's a fantastic design choice, but I think it also highlights just how observant Latimer was, how aware he was, how important he was to solve these seemingly simple problems, but problems that we face on a daily basis. So this is one of Latimer's patents. He received 7 patents, some that he individually owns, some that he co-owns, but this is him trying to think of how to improve, in a way, public health and public safety, and he does that in different ways throughout his career. So he is envisioning a better way of using the toilet on train cars. At the time, the bottom of the train car was kind of just open, so dust, sparks, anything that was on the train tracks. A gust of wind comes up, you got dust coming up at you as you're trying to use the restroom, and that's not really ideal to use. It was a last-minute resort. So he's thinking of different ways to make this safer and make this more appealing to use. So he's thinking of how to ensure that when you open the lid, that this bottom door, this bottom segment here is closed once it's open. Once you close that lid, then it opens. He also was envisioning having sand instead of water in this reservoir, which would help also to push waste down through this toilet. And this is early on in his career. Again, he's just thinking about ways to improve things that we use on a daily basis. He wasn't necessarily starting from scratch. He wasn't working on these massive inventions, but he's really trying to think of how can I improve these seemingly simple things that really make a big impact and a big difference. So I love that we are highlighting this here. I love to kind of take tours in here just to briefly show this. I think it's just a fantastic way to think about Latimer as a problem solver, as an empathetic person, as a very observant and aware person. These I don't know, I can't go into too much detail about them. This is a diagram of an arc lamp that he was working with here Maxim. This is a drawing he had done with when he was working with Thomas Edison. So he was working with Edison after he's used his patents. He's thinking about ways of improving electric lighting. But in the latter part of his time with Edison, he's actually defending Edison's patents in court, suing on behalf of Edison, being aware of other patents that are coming out to be able to defend Edison's patents in court. So this is one of the, again, super technical drawings that Latimer was tasked with doing to kind of explain, understand, break down these incredibly detailed components of these mechanisms and how they work, to then understand the differences between what Edison was doing versus what other inventors were doing. Okay, so welcome to our Tinker Lab. This is a part of the exhibition, but it is also essentially our classroom space, our workshop space that continues to highlight Latimer's innovation, both with his technical career, but again also with his artistic career and the ways that he connected language and observation in his work. Of course, there's a beautiful portrait behind me of Mr. Latimer, but one, we are surrounded by more of Latimer's quotes. This one says, like the light of the sun, it beautifies all things on which it shines, and is no less welcome in the palace than in the humblest home. So, again, I think we just really get to reflect on how important it was for Latimer to think of how to improve access to electric lighting. So that's kind of the story of this wall here. Before the incandescent light bulb, there was arc lighting. So Latimer was an expert with installing arc lighting and understanding arc lighting systems. One of his patents here was for thinking of a different way to clamp and support bulbs for arc lights and arc lamps. These were primarily ways of lighting that were installed outdoors. It was too bright, a little dangerous for indoor installation, so primarily outdoors. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, just his expertise and how this expertise allows him to travel to different countries as the expert on these systems. In this patent here, he's thinking of different ways to clamp filaments, where he is trying to think of ways to reduce the amount of materials used in light bulbs to make them more affordable to make, which makes it more accessible to make as well. And then in the invention machine, we're able to see another one of his really significant patents as well, where he's thinking of improving the process for manufacturing the carbon filaments that would go into light bulbs as well. So this is one of our new interactives as well, our invention machine. We're able to really explore, break down, understand Latimer's patents and some of his ideas. So along with the two patents related to electric lighting that I mentioned, his most, I think, important one is this one that he developed while he was working with here in Maxim, where he's observing, noticing that filaments are fragile, they're breaking very easily, which means that lighting is not as reliable, which means that lighting is expensive, and so he's trying to think of how to change that. So he comes up with a way, or realizes that if you encase filaments into cardboard envelopes, that helps to protect them while they're being created, while they're being baked, while the filaments are able to expand and contract at the same time as the cardboard envelopes. Whereas previously, they were using metal molds, and so the filaments inside were warping, which meant they were prone to breakage, which meant they were reliable. So his way of changing that was to make it more affordable, to strengthen them, to make them more durable, to ensure that more homes, more families had access to electric lighting. So this screen shows his patents and ideas. This one is in 3D. You're able to see it in progress and how it would have worked. But it also features some of his other ideas where he's thinking about public safety and public health. This one is for a way where he's thinking of improving kind of air quality in large cities like Manhattan, like New York City, where he's living in Manhattan, then living in Brooklyn. He's living in apartments, which, you know, we have a lot of people living in apartments. And so he's trying to think of how to ensure that people have access to healthy air or clean air. So this cooling apparatus would go into your window. Fluid would be, disinfecting fluid would be encased up here in this kind of container. It would trickle down this mesh, and as air is blowing through the window, it is being cooled by this fluid. It's being disinfected by this fluid to make sure that people living in busy cities were able to breathe in clean air. An amazing thing about this patent as well, if you look closely, you'll see the name Mary Latimer as well. So again, Latimer's wife. She was incredibly supportive. She traveled with Latimer as he traveled to different cities, and she was very supportive of his work, and again, was a witness for one of his patents. He was also thinking about ways of, which one is this? Ways of supporting and protecting books. So he's thinking of different ways to create bookends. He's thinking of different ways to store hats and coats. So this is a locking rack that would kind of hold your hat in place to keep it there, to keep it secure. So he's thinking about these things that we might not think about, but you know, an invention like this can just make something a lot easier for you. Your hat's not falling down on the ground every time you try to put it up there. So he was very imaginative. He wasn't really just thinking of this one kind of field of improving life for people. Again, he only has 7 patents, but he's constantly drawing, constantly thinking of how to improve things. He's thinking about elevator safety. He was thinking about ship-to-ship communication at sea. He's thinking about connecting homes and electricity. So he's constantly drawing, constantly innovating, and constantly questioning what he can do from his expertise, experience, and lived experiences to make life better. I almost forgot. So this room is, it also highlights his daughter, so Lewis Rebecca, who was the artist who attended Pratt, Emma Jeanette Latimer Norman, who was the concert pianist who attended Juilliard. So we're able to see his daughters as adults here. We're able to see a little bit more about Latimer's poetry, and we're also able to see more of, I think, Latimer's curiosity, Latimer's love of his environment and surroundings. So just more of his drawings from observation, again, combined with really technical work, where again, his artistic skill, his understanding of color and color theory is coming into play with his drawings. So this is our classroom space, it's our lab. So this is where we will have family programming. So we'll be starting those programs. The birthday celebration on the 14th really kickstarts those programs. We'll have them once a month, and they'll be housed in this space. So we'll welcome in designers, artists, or we'll have museum-led activities, drop-in activities that are free for families to come in and enjoy a unique experience, a STEAM experience.
15-year-old son, Ethan, and I had a fun and relaxing morning. We returned home, and Ethan walked to his best friend's house an hour later. I heard the ambulance scream by the street, carrying my beautiful boy. Ethan was shot in the head in his best friend's house with an unsecured gun. He had zero chance of survival. The father, the gun owner, he stored his 3 guns and bullets in a shoebox.
How do you feel?
That has to be the most horrific experience that a human could ever have.
David, would you give any advice?
First thing you do is not keep your ammunition with your weapons, and that your weapons need to be locked at all times.
So we find ourselves in one of the center rooms of the House Museum that we've named A Definite Purpose. This room tells the tale of Latimer's professional exploits from beginning all the way until his time of retirement. As was mentioned, Latimer, as a child of fugitive slaves, being raised in Massachusetts, had very extreme poverty and of course faced issues with racial reckoning, social standards of education, etc. Latimer had a primary school education, but afterwards he would have went to what's called farm school. And you'll learn more about when they come here. The educational opportunities weren't that expansive at that time for a young African-American man. From a quite tumultuous upbringing, he would of course be able to find work. He would spend a lot of his time after primary school balancing farm school and local jobs. He would work in barbershops, printing offices, laundromats, etc. Always trying to add money to the family budget in order to sustain their housing. But it's at this moment that he actually had an opportunity to enter into one of the most dynamically changing fields at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, which is that of industrial invention. When Latimer was in Boston, he found his first job at Crosby & Gold, his first full-time opportunity to work in a stable environment. He was paid very lowly, about $3 to $5 per week, but as one of his first opportunities to be in a professional atmosphere, he was in close proximity with a number of draftsmen. Draftsmen were people that drew technical drawings. Whenever you have an invention, whenever you have an idea for something, whether it's a process or a gear or a switch, you have to have someone who's going to draw that idea out for you, and then you would submit it to the US Patent Office for approval to have that design be tied directly to your name or your company. At Lewis Latimer's young age, in the 1860s, 1870s, this would be an incredible time for both invention and African Americans, because, as we know, there were periods where African Americans weren't considered citizens and thus could not have ownership of their own ideas. After the Emancipation Proclamation and the citizenship of the African American beginning, Latimer was at a moment in time where also the field of electrical lighting was changing across the entire world. People were moving from gas lighting systems into knowledge of current electricity, and those new opportunities to revolutionize the way that we would light up our businesses and homes was where Latimer found a lot of his early opportunities. So he would teach himself how to do mechanical drawing. He would borrow materials and tools from the draftsmen at Crosby & Gold. And this would lead to being noticed both by Crosby & Gold and a number of other notable inventors like Alexander Graham Bell, Hiram Maxim, who was the chief engineer of the United States Electrical Company, and as well, of course, as ultimately Thomas Edison, who would note that Latimer's extensive work with Maxim and the electrical company would lead to a lot of opportunities to grow the Edison company and really fortify their hold on the new incandescent lighting system. We have a number of artifacts and tools that help us tell this story in this part of the museum. Images, memorabilia, things that Latimer would gain at his time working for Hiram Maxim, Thomas Edison, and others. And we know that at his time for Edison, he would work for 26 years with the Edison Company. At that moment, in those moments, he would be given a number of opportunities to both continue his own inventions and ideas, but also to be recognized by Edison for his contributions. Latimer would write the book, the first book in the United States about electrical lighting. This new revolutionary way that we had of creating incandescent light bulbs was more affordable, As mentioned, he had contributed to ways that would be a little bit more sustainable. And as the world was changing and turning to the early 19th and 20th century, we would then see that, of course, battling the racist factors, he would be able to cement himself in Edison's legacy. Being given ownership as one of Edison's pioneers, one of the first cohorts that would preserve Edison's legacy to continuing forward for hundreds of years. So what we find so incredible about the narrative that Latimer adds to the knowledge of the incandescent light bulb at Edison's company is that it really lets us know that it's important to look at stories and the changing innovations of our time as multiples. There are many people who are part of Edison Company, and there were many inventors and idealists who were working alongside Edison to preserve and to ameliorize his ideas. Again, we have a wonderful image here of Latimer sitting in a room full of the first cohort of the Edison Pioneers Company. Notably, he's the only African-American male or person of color in this room. But we see, as a testament to history, what his presence in that room could have meant for future generations of inventors, future generations of scientific workers. Over here we have some additional memorabilia, some honorifics from the US Patent Office that would justify Lewis Latimer in a number of his ideas. This was his idea for the cooling and disinfecting apparatus that, as mentioned, would be something that was important in new urbanized areas to preserve air pollution, air quality, things like that. Some implements from Latimer's own house. He would, of course, had the latest cutting-edge materials to light up his home. I also want to point out this. Latimer was, of course, not the only member of this initial cohort of African-American inventors, both men and women, in terms of the first wave of inventors who would have citizenship status. Henry Baker was a member of the US Patent Office who would actually take record. He would send out thousands of letters to all types of people who he would see on his patents in the US Patent Office, and he would ask of them to tell their story. This is one of his first early publications of the inventive genius of the colored race, at that time in the early 1900s, highlighting the work of people of color in the field of invention and engineering. And that's really what this room seeks to tell. From very meager beginnings, Latimer was able to build himself a career. There were moments when he didn't always have work, and definitely some tough times in between his work with Maxim and Edison. But notably, towards the end of his life, he would have a pension, and as well, he would be able to retire quite comfortably after buying this house and after the Edison Company would merge with GE Westinghouse.
Okay, so we had a fascinating time here at the Lewis Latimer Museum. How's this?
House Museum.
House Museum. Here in Flushing, Queens. Very exciting time. Lots to see, lots to enjoy. Come over, as our host Shane and Adriana said, and we look forward to presenting you with another exciting episode. I'm Patrick Tomlinson. Stay tuned.